Welcome to Mangino Talks. I'm Mangino. Thank you very much for being here with us. With me today, Dr. Knowledge. The book is the all-time book of fascinating facts. The website is knowledgeinanutshell.com. If you want to find out more about him, you can also follow him on social media as well, Facebook and Twitter. You can follow me on all the social media platforms that are out there as well, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. It's all at Mangino Talks. Stay on top of everything I'm doing all of the time by being associated with all of those social media platforms. Please like them, share them, subscribe to them. I greatly appreciate it. Let's talk to Dr. Knowledge. Doctor, welcome back to Mangino Talks.
Always good being with you, Mangino.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Also, Misinformation joining us today. Hi.
It's much fun to be with you, too.
Is it really?
It really is.
All right, we're going to go over some fascinating facts with Dr. Knowledge, and Misinformation has some interesting one-liners, puns, if you will, that sort of wrap up on a high note with them both. So, Doc, where do you want to start? The all-time book of fascinating facts, once again, a compilation of all of your works. You've decided to take the best of all of your different books and create this book. Let's go over some of these today.
Okay, there's so many what I call fascinating stories. It's just amazing. For example, before we get to something serious, why in the world do we call hamburgers hamburgers? Do we ever stop to think there ain't no ham in hamburgers? So why do we call them hamburgers? And of course, we have the story in our book. It all started when we had a large number of German immigrants came to the United States in the late 1800s, and included in that group of German immigrants were people from the city, the German city of Hamburg. People from Hamburg, Germany came here and brought with them their custom of serving ground meat, which was unusual in those days. And people here started calling ground meat hamburgers after the people from Hamburg, Germany. Okay. The name comes from the city of origin and not from what's in the product, because as we say, there ain't no ham in hamburgers.
Oh, wow.
But we still call them hamburgers. And
do I recall correctly that hamburgers, as they were originally served, were without buns?
That's correct. That's another story we have. The first place that put buns with hamburgers and created what we really call hamburgers today, that happened at a place called Louis' Lunch, which is still there, by the way, in New Haven, Connecticut. There's a diner called Louis' Lunch, and back in the early 1900s, that long ago, over 100 years ago, there was a guy named Louis Larson at Louis' Lunch in New Haven, Connecticut. He had this diner, and there were construction workers working nearby, and at lunchtime, they went over to Louis' Lunch to get their lunch, but they wanted to take the lunch with them back to their work site and eat at the work site instead of eating at the restaurant. And so he had no provision for takeouts, but when they asked if they could get something that they could take back to their work site, he said, well, I have this meat cooking on the grill, and I got some buns over here. What if I put the meat in the buns? And that's what they did. And that started what we now know as hamburgers, with the meat in the bun. And the Smithsonian Institution recognizes Louis' Lunch as the creator of what we now call a hamburger in a bun.
Isn't that fascinating that something that we would look as a staple in our diet, that you just can't imagine life not having a hamburger, that it wasn't something that was purposefully created because they thought of a marketing idea. It was almost by happenstance.
Right. And the amazing thing is, Mangino, by the way, this whole story is confirmed by the Smithsonian Institution. They have a lot of data on this. The amazing thing is that Louis' Lunch, and it's just a little diner, is still there. And it's still owned by the same family. The Larson family still owns that diner, the last we checked, in New Haven, Connecticut. Isn't that amazing?
It is. It would be a great reason to go to New Haven for no other reason but to get a hamburger.
Go to Louis' Lunch.
Go to Louis' Lunch, get a hamburger where hamburgers were invented.
But whether the meat is in a bun or not, it's still called a hamburger. And again, that name comes from its city of origin, Hamburg, Germany. And then we also say in that story, in the All-Time Book of Fascinating Facts, there are other things named after cities like that. Frankfurters, for example. The name Frankfurter comes from the fact that they were a big specialty in Frankfurt, Germany. And Wieners, that name comes from Vienna. In the German language, Vienna is pronounced with as if it were, a W, Wiener.
Right.
And that's where that name comes from.
Okay.
So all those things really came from their cities rather than, and again, the next time you have a hamburger with somebody, say, hey, there ain't no ham here. Why are they called hamburgers?
And if you're going to have the hamburger without the bun and just eat it, you're doing the low carb diet thing, then you're actually eating it the way the hamburgers
Were
really ate it back
right.
when they were in Hamburg, Germany.
It's still a hamburger with or without the bun.
It's still a hamburger. That's right. I like that. All right. Next one. There's a sport that shares its name with a very famous individual.
Right. There is a famous man in history whose last name is the same name as a sport that we have today. And that's a good question you can ask people. What sport has the same name as a very famous explorer from the past? There's nobody named baseball or basketball or football. So what sport could it possibly be that is the same as the name of a famous explorer from the past? And shall we give the answer?
I tell you what, how about if we hold on to that one
Okay.
for a little bit later? Let's see if people can actually figure it out for themselves. Because it isn't a sport that I don't know of anybody playing in the States, though. I mean, this is really something that's popular outside of the U.S., right?
Yeah, but it's a well-known sport.
It
I
is
think.
well known, but
Yeah.
it's not played here in the States very often.
It's bigger
all.
in Europe, certainly, yeah.
Yeah. How about if we go on to, and we'll come back to that in a moment, but I want to go on to JFK and Lincoln and just the amazing connection.
There are just so many coincidences. It's just unbelievable. I don't know if I can remember. I certainly can't remember all of them. We have them in the All-Time Book of Fascinating Facts. It goes a couple pages. All the incredible coincidences between those two assassinations. And let's start at the beginning. Both Kennedy and Lincoln were shot on a Friday. They were both shot sitting next to their wife. Neither wife was injured. They were both succeeded by men with the same name, Johnson. Lincoln was succeeded by Andrew Johnson. Kennedy was succeeded by Lyndon Johnson. Same number of letters in their first names, and of course also for their last names. The two assassins had three-word names. Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy. John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln. Same number of letters in Lee Harvey Oswald.
And John Wilkes.
John Wilkes Booth. Wow. Lincoln was born in 1808. Kennedy was born in 1908. Lincoln became president in 1860. Kennedy became president in 1960. Lincoln had sons named Robert and Edward. Kennedy had brothers named Robert and Edward. There are just so many. It just goes on and on and on. It's just incredible. And the final two that we'll just do here on this podcast is Lincoln's secretary was named Kennedy. Kennedy's secretary was named Lincoln. And the car in which Kennedy was shot when he was riding in Dallas, the car in which he was assassinated, was a Lincoln.
Wow.
How about that?
Wow. For the people who were initially diving into this, I mean, just the fascination that all of these different details could be tied together this way just by happenstance. It's hard to believe that with all of these connections and all of these comparative notes back and forth, that it could happen just by chance this way.
Yeah, just amazing. And when you see more in the book, it just keeps going on and on. It's just, the same number of letters. There's just so many things. They each died in a place with the initials PH. Lincoln was taken across the street after he was shot. to the Peterson house. It was a boarding house, and that's where he died. They put him in bed there, and that's where he died. And Kennedy was also died in a place with the initials PH. He was taken to Parkland Hospital in Dallas, where he died, where he was pronounced dead.
Wow.
It just goes on and on. It's just amazing.
It is. What explains all of that to you? How do you make sense of that?
Well, and there are other things. Yeah, that's a good point. Why is that? We have a couple of things like that in the all-time book of fascinating facts. For example, 9/11. There are so many coincidences in the 9/11 story, the terrorist attack on the United States. First of all, the first plane to hit the World Trade Center that started that terrible day was Flight 11. There were 92 people on board that flight. 9 plus 2 is 11. It happened in New York City. Number of letters in the phrase New York City, 11. The second plane that the terrorists came on attacked the Pentagon. Number of letters in the Pentagon, 11. The third plane that crashed on its way to Washington happened in Shanksville, PA. Number of letters in Shanksville, 11.
Wow.
The president at the time was George W. Bush. Number of letters in George W. Bush, 11. The first attack was in New York City. Number of letters in New York City, 11. The two towers, the World Trade Center, before they were hit, were standing there. They looked like the number 11. And I think the most amazing end to this, Mangino, is that after September 11th, there are exactly 111 days left in the year.
Wow.
That is a true story.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
It is.
And by the way, the date when the ground was broken to build the Pentagon during World War II, the date was September 11th, 1940, the early 1940s.
I did not hear that one before.
Yeah. So that's the kind of coincidences we have in the book. I'll just give you one other.
Please.
The first men on Earth, according to the Bible, were Adam, Abel, and Cain. The last name initials AAC, Adam, Abel, and Cain, right?
Mm-hmm.
The crew that put the first men on the moon was Apollo 11, and the crew was Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. Also, same initials, AAC.
Wow.
Adam, Abel, Cain, Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. And as we say in the book, is that a coincidence or not?
A lot of great stuff.
Maybe it was meant to be, huh?
A lot of great stuff in the book. Website is knowledgeinanutshell.com, the all-time book of fascinating facts. The phone number is
1-800-NUTSHELL.
1-800-NUTSHELL. A couple more things before I wrap up the segment with you. Mark Twain, how did he make it into your book?
The story we have is, how could a person be born in both Florida and Missouri? And it really happened. And it happened to a famous person, among others. Mark Twain, the famous author, was born. There's a little town in northeast Missouri called Florida.
That explains it.
And Mark Twain, as it turns out, supposedly used to go through his life telling people, I was born in both Florida and Missouri. And he was. He was born in the town of Florida in the state of Missouri.
I like that.
Yeah. He always had a lot of fun with that.
Maybe the most popular song, most sung song ever. What song is that?
It is Happy Birthday to You. It is said that more people know the words to that song than any other song that's ever been written. I think you'd agree with that, right?
Right.
I mean, little kids know the lyrics, and certainly adults. Virtually every adult knows the lyrics to that song. And yet, hardly anybody, if anybody, knows who wrote that song or ever heard of the people who wrote that song. That song was not written by professional songwriters, even though it's probably the most famous song of all time as far as people knowing the words to it. There were two school teachers in Kentucky named Mildred and Patty Hill, and they wrote a song as a classroom greeting, and they originally called it Good Morning to All. And one of the sisters used to play it on the piano, as the kids came to school in the morning. And then one day they found out that one of the kids was having a birthday the next day. So that evening they changed the lyrics from Good Morning to All to Happy Birthday to You. And as we say in the book, history was made. And yet hardly anybody knows the names Mildred and Patty Hill, and they wrote the most famous song of all time.
And they never made any money off that either. I mean, all the you think about the royalty rights and everything for music and lyrics,
Right.
and
There have been battles. This all happened in the late 1800s.
Right.
Is when they wrote the song.
okay.
And all these years there have been all kinds of suits and legal issues as to the rights to that song.
Happy birthday to you. The most embarrassing loss ever. What would you say that was?
Yeah, this is for a U.S. president running for a second term.
Mm-hmm.
The most embarrassing loss, and what an embarrassing loss it was. Will ever see anything like this again? A man ran for a second term as president and didn't even finish second. He finished third.
Wow.
And not only that, he carried only 2 states.
That's bad.
And this president was William Howard Taft. He was elected president in 1908,
Mm-hmm.
ran for a second term in 1912. But Theodore Roosevelt entered the race. Roosevelt had been president before and was running for another term. He didn't have 2 complete terms. He had become president by originally being vice president. So he wanted to run for another term. So he ran on a third-party ticket, and he got more votes than the current president, William Howard Taft. He had something like 80-some electoral votes.
Mm-hmm.
William Howard Taft had only 8 electoral votes.
Wow.
Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, had over 400 electoral votes, easily won the election. Teddy Roosevelt finished second, and poor William Howard Taft finished third. Carried only 2 states, Vermont and Utah.
That is an embarrassing loss.
That was an embarrassing loss. As it turned out, he went back. He had been a law school instructor at Yale
Mm-hmm.
before he got into politics, so he went back to teaching at Yale after that bad loss. But then in 1920, Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. After his 2 terms, a Republican came into the presidency, Warren Harding, in 1920, and Harding appointed Taft to be Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, which he was. So he became the only, as embarrassing as that presidential loss
Right.
was, here he became the only man in history who has been both 2 top jobs. He'd been both President of the United States and Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. How about that?
That's pretty good.
And he had that job for till his death in early 1930s. And he later said that he enjoyed being Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court more than being President of the United States. But isn't that something that one man
Yes.
could hold? You might say those are 2 of the highest jobs, the
without
2
a
highest
doubt.
jobs in the country. He was both President and Chief Justice, and yet he did all that and had that embarrassing loss as President and still came out with a really earth-shaking 2 jobs that he had.
Of course. How about this? Let's go back to that sport that shares the name of a very famous individual.
Right. The only sport we have that has the same name as a famous person in history, that sport is polo. Same name as the famous Italian explorer Marco Polo.
Of course it would be an Italian. Of course it would. Misinformation with us, and misinformation. I understand you have some things to wrap up the show.
I have some puns, but isn't Dr. Knowledge fascinating?
He is. Somebody needs to write a book about him.
Yeah, there should be a book about fascinating facts. As fascinating as a doctor. Here are some of my questions. How do trains listen? With their engine ears. What goes up and down but never moves? Stairs.
That's good too.
How does a train eat? It choo-choos.
I love that one.
Why did the kid jump up and down before pouring their juice? The carton said, shake well before drinking. I like what mechanics wear overall.
Good stuff. Audrey, do me a favor. Hold tight on some of those. We'll get to those in the next episode.
Can I give you one more?
Of course you can.
Those? We have a bunch of riddles in our book, and one of them is, what happens when the fog clears in Los Angeles?
I don't know.
UCLA.
I like that one too. Dr. Knowledge, Misinformation. Dr. Knowledge, the all-time book of fascinating facts. The website is knowledgeinanutshell.com. The phone number, Doctor?
1-800-NUTSHELL.
1-800-NUTSHELL. And what's really great is when you call that number, you're not going to go into some kind of voicemail tree. You're not going to talk to somebody that's outside the country. You're going to talk to Dr. Knowledge or Misinformation. You can follow them on Facebook and on Twitter. Look at Dr. Knowledge. And speaking of social media, you can always find me on social media too: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. And all you have to do is type in @Mangino Talks in any of them, and you'll find me. Till next time on Mangino Talks, I'm Mangino.